Alright, hello, I'm back again with another video, and this will be about, as you can see in the title, it's about instruction in the way that the enemy works in a spiritual attack, so that will be the theme of the video today, and this will be audio only because, a lot of this dream interpretation stuff and what I got from my dream is all written down, so it'll just be if I had like a regular video of you just looking at me, it'll just be me looking at my phone most of the time because everything that I have I wrote down. So to cut that out, I will just be off the screen. So in this dream, it was a very, very weird dream because the dream involved Jesus, obviously, and the enemy. But the oddest part about the dream was that, Jesus was like a floating head. And that was kind of like weird. But the point still got across. So the dream that I had, I don't really remember most of the dream, but these are the parts that were like important enough. But basically in my dream, I was like in this mansion that had a lot of corridors, had a lot of open spaces, so there's a lot of places that you could run through. And in my dream, Jesus was a floating head, and I was basically chasing after Jesus, and I was trying to catch him, but I couldn't because he was a floating head, but also he was going like way faster than me. And when I did catch him by his hair, his hair slipped through my fingers. So that was a pretty significant part of the dream. And then also the enemy during that time too. In the dream, the enemy was like always around. A very distracting presence in the dream. And what was interesting about the dream was that it was like snowing, because like those like off into the wilderness like mansions that are in these like very vast big places with tons of woods. It was that kind of like mansion, and it was like snowing, and so apparently I guess it was Christmas in my dream. But the way that Jesus was speaking to me, because he was speaking to me like through multiple types of outlets, but in this particular outlet it was like it was interesting because he was like speaking through like the ornaments on the Christmas tree, but most specifically the star that you put at the top of the Christmas tree. He was speaking through that the most, and it was always glowing. And again, the enemy was also doing a similar thing, but clearly the coloring was different, like the way that Jesus spoke, and what he spoke through, it had a more like gleaming bright color. When the enemy spoke, it was like very dull and just, it wasn't bright. And so that was kind of like what that dream was about. That's like the most that I remembered from it. But what I got from that and what I interpreted from that is mostly through observation of like the way that Jesus was acting throughout the dream, and also like what he was doing. And so I'm just going to start with that. So when he was when he was going through the corridors, because I was following Jesus the entire time while he was in the dream. He was like some random floating head, but I was following him. So no matter where Jesus was, both me and him were always around each other. And so was the enemy. But what was interesting to me about the dream was his aura and like sort of like the way that he presented himself in my dream. His aura kind of reminded me of like two things. It was like the aura of like somebody who's popular, like a popular person at school, like or like a celebrity, and like also someone who's like highly respected and who has like a high respectable position. So basically in my dream I felt like, you know, that is the presence, that is like the two of those things are like the combination of the presence of Jesus. It's like he's someone who everybody wants to be around, but also someone you respect highly. And how I felt in the dream was very significant because every time his presence, the most important thing about his presence was that it was like extremely welcoming and extremely peaceful. And it was every time I got around him, that was the feeling that I had. And I just wanted to keep being around him. So that was a part of the reason why I followed him everywhere, no matter where he went in my dream, because that was his presence. His presence was very calming, very welcoming, very friendly. You know, you'd wanted to be around someone like that. You know, it's kind of like when like the celebrity or the popular person finally gives you attention. It's kind of like that, but it wasn't like prideful or anything. It didn't have any like bad negative qualities attached to it. It was just strictly peaceful, and that was like the main reason why I followed him. And it was an addicting feeling, so I wanted to keep being around it. And sorry, I'm looking at what I wrote down. So also what I observed was that the enemy was around him just as much. And so how the enemy appeared in my dream was he was kind of like, he gave off the essence of like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. Like he would disappear. Oh, and I'm gonna get into this in a second too, because when I'm talking about like presence too, like just the stark difference of like when Jesus was around and when the enemy was around, it was like a very clear difference. And I think there's something significant about that and something that you could possibly take too, because then you would understand the presence, what that feels like, how you know which one is which. So for the enemy, he also sought to be around Jesus, and that, I think that's like a big thing about his presence, period. It was like irresistible. It was pure attraction because he was pure. So he was pure, holy, and good. So even like evil energy or energy that is extremely negative would want to be around someone like Jesus, because he was, like I said before, just pure, attractive, magnetic energy, aura, whatever. But or whatever you want to call it. Sorry, that sounded really dismissive, but yes, the enemy had the presence of like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. He would always he was kind of like a bug. He was just like, his presence was very distracting, which, true to the name, true to how the enemy works, very distracting, very trickster, sly energy. Like, he was always around, and the most important thing about the way he moved around was that it was like his energy was all over the place. Whereas with Jesus, his energy was very calming and he always stayed in one place. The enemy cannot stay in one place. He would disappear, he would reappear. It was like very anxious energy. And it was energy that, you know, you could tell like there's a lot going on right there. So like I feel like it's important for people who are too following in God's direction or obeying God, like you understand like the presence of like Jesus or God, which I feel like that's what Jesus represents in my dream, him and God. And then the enemy and the stark difference of their presence. And I want to say this is like, that's how you know that that the enemy is operating in your life, is because the presence of the enemy is very like anxious energy. It's very all over the place. It doesn't sit still. It disappears. It reappears. It's very distracting and confusing, and that was how it was for me in the dream, because like the entire time that I was there, I didn't know what Jesus was talking about, but I knew Jesus was talking to me. So every time we were having a conversation, it would always be between me and him, and he would never go ahead of me. He would never linger behind me. We were always at the same pace. And yeah, like he would stay still. It was very peaceful. I wanted to be around him. So it wasn't like crazy things were happening around. But when I saw the enemy, because the enemy was also a floating object too. I mean, he kind of was a floating head, but he was a lot smaller. I don't really remember what the enemy looked like, but he was definitely floating around Jesus as well. And he he distracted me a lot in the dream when Jesus was speaking to me. And and it wasn't like, at times I could tell that it was on purpose, but other times it was because he just couldn't resist being around Jesus. So it's like, you know, it was like two things at the same time happening at the same time, like two good reasons happening. It was because he wanted to derail me, but also because he wanted to be around Jesus, because Jesus had such attractive energy. So it's like, you know, why wouldn't he want to be around Jesus? So that's how it was like in my dream. Like whenever Jesus would speak to me, I would always notice the enemy bouncing around him. So it like like in a legitimate sense, just by that description alone, the enemy was using distraction. And I feel that is kind of like the main point of like the strategy here. And I probably might split this, because this is like, I have like such a long interpretation, and as you can see, like the way that I'm talking about it, it's kind of sporadic. I didn't really like write any of this down. But yeah, like the enemy his presence is very distracting, very confusing, very anxious. It's not consistent at all. So I feel like this is a big part of like recognizing the strategy of the enemy, the tactics of the enemy, and the overall effect of the enemy in your life. Because yes, that's what was happening while I was on my journey with God and Jesus. And the entire time it's been, and that has been consistently taking place throughout the dream. So yeah, I think I might split this off into parts, but in this particular beginning part of the dream, the enemy really distracted me from Jesus, because when he was talking, the enemy was always around. And sometimes I would, instead of looking at Jesus and focusing on Jesus and God, I was focusing on the enemy. And that can also be a tactic as well. Just the mere presence of the enemy can distract you from just focusing on God. And that's kind of the purpose of what he's doing. So, yes, I'd say this is the best explanation that I got for right now. I'm going to speak more about the dream and the enemy's tactics, but this is like the main thing I want to get down, that the enemy, this is like the presence of the enemy. So like, Jesus's presence by it being still, being peaceful. It's slow paced. It's never rushed. And the presence of the enemy is very like sporadic. It makes you anxious. It distracts you, keeps you unfocused.